This Zero Now program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
Part of our this journey to safer schools, if you will, is determining what can we do to make schools safer for good. And we came up with this concept called the path of safer schools, and it really starts with a safety team, right? Who's the leader on your team that can guide a school district through that journey? Once you have that leadership established, the next phase or next stage is understanding where your vulnerabilities are. Where are the gaps in security on your school or campus? Are there cultural factors? Are there physical security aspects? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We have three incredible guests joining us today that are going to share their experiences and perspectives with all of us here in the Zero Now community. The first guest we're going to introduce is Glenn Norling, former member of the FBI. And Glenn, would you just mind providing a quick background on yourself and your connection with the topic?
Absolutely, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Glenn Norling, and I'm a retired FBI agent. I'm currently the executive director of the Active Shooter Prevention Project. I also have a consulting business as well. I retired from the FBI in 2020, and since then I've been able to basically spend full time consulting, talking about active shooter preparedness and response and everything like that. So that's what brings me here today. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Glenn. We're glad that you could join us and know you've got some great perspectives to share with us. Our next guest is Carly Duco from Montgomery County Department of Public Safety. Welcome, Carly.
Thanks, Laura. So my name is Carly Duco. I'm the School Safety Specialist for Montgomery County, Pennsylvania's Department of Public Safety. I have experience working in special education throughout various schools in Montgomery County and experience as a correctional officer in the county's prison.
Awesome. Thanks, Carly. We're glad that you could join us and share your perspectives. And last but not least, Chief Valdemar Talley, welcome from Decatur Public Schools. Chief, welcome.
Hey, thank you, R. I think that my name is Val Talley. I let everybody call me Val, but I'm a retired police officer, 35 years, and I, like Glenn, I had a consulting company, and that awarded me a position with the Decatur Public Schools District, where I'm dealing with school and safety matters.
Great, thanks, Chief. Glad you could join us. Can I call you Val? All right, thanks, Val. All right, so let's go ahead. Before we get started, we have a poll. We posted this poll in the Zero Now community on Friday, but let's put this out here again. Do you see the poll? I don't. Oh, here we go. Now it shows up here. Okay, so to our participants, what would you estimate the most overlooked vulnerability is in school safety? And we'll give you a second here. And just like our community, it was quite varied. Interesting to see the. Still coming in. Okay, we'll go ahead and end this, and let's take a look at the results here. It looks like the most common element that was identified was mental health and bullying issues. And Carly, we'll start with you. Are you surprised by the results of that poll?
I am not surprised by the results of that poll. Having worked in schools firsthand, I've had to intervene in different incidents to stop the action of bullying, and have worked with students who were the victim of bullying as well.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I apologize. It's very common.
So Glenn, I know you do assessments and you're very familiar. I mean, are you surprised? I mean, when you think of vulnerability assessments, are people thinking mostly physical security vulnerabilities, or are they looking more broadly?
Well, I think everybody naturally starts out with looking at the physical vulnerabilities and challenges with just physical facilities. I'm actually pleased to see the results, because that tells me that the people that are responding, that are people attending this, understand that it's far beyond just the physical security. And so I'm actually pleased to see the results of this poll.
What's interesting is, we've been having a lot of discussions lately in the last several months about purchasing security technology and programs and this and that, just I wouldn't say blindly, but just purchasing and stuff like this. Chief, from your experience, do most school districts or campuses do a full vulnerability assessment or gap assessment before deciding what technology or services they need or training they need to purchase for their district?
Well, it's been my experience so far that a lot of school districts are just now getting into the business of having like security directors. A lot of them are coming out of the realm of law enforcement, so they kind of default back to what they've done in the past with full site assessments. And the balance is, how do they get those type of resources needed to cover those gaps without investing a tremendous amount of resources?
And so, in Carly, so who conducts assessments in your district, or how does that work in Montgomery County?
So throughout Montgomery County, myself and another individual that I work with conduct physical safety assessments. So we would look at the facility's exterior, interior. But in conducting these assessments, I've noticed that the idea of safety as a whole can be very overwhelming for school administrators. So while we're walking around the building, sometimes they're seeing things for the first time from the building level perspective while they're trying to manage their overarching district safety goals.
And let's go back to Decatur. So who conducts it? Is there a specific role? Is it done from a county-wide level, like in Montgomery, or how does that work, Chief?
Well, for right now, because we're new, my position is only a year old. What I did is I gained membership to NASRO, the National Association of School Resource Officers. They have a program called CEPTED. Sent one of my officers there, for that, to do evaluations. But I'm still leaning toward having an outside source to come in and do a professional assessment of all features so that it could be a template of where we need to go.
Glenn, Chief mentioned CEPTED. Is a CEPTED assessment, is that enough? Is that enough to get started at least?
I think assessments, there's such a varied range. I mean, you want to start with something. CEPTED is a great, and that's crime prevention through environmental design. So it's a place to start. And just when you talk about assessments, one of the things in preparing for our panel today, I wanted to provide some specific details out there. So what I like to see 6 different elements in an assessment that's conducted. I mean, you start with a physical facility assessment. You'll also look at your environment, and by environment, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this later, but when I talk about environment, I mean the external environment to the facility as well as the interior, and we talk about climate, and like I said, we'll talk about that in a little bit more in detail later. But it's not only that physical environment, the physical facilities, but it's the plans and process. What emergency plans and processes are in place? What type of training takes part? What from internal and external? So what type of training do you do with the community partnerships with public safety agencies out there as well? And then finally, the 6th element of that is bringing all that together into how do you integrate security facility technology together with your plans and processes to basically take all of these things, meld them together so you don't have gaps out there. So that's what I like to see as a spectrum of the 6 different elements of assessments.
And with the technology, it's very important for school administrators, I feel, to keep in mind that everyone knows that there is a bunch of technology out there. And when you have an assessment completed and you're reviewing the results, what technologies are recommended that you would be able to appropriately implement in your building? Some assessors will recommend specific technologies that they're affiliated with. Some will recommend technologies that sound great but are financially unsustainable for the district to maintain in the long term. So also looking for other short-term mitigation strategies while we're in the process of getting even the funding for those recommendations.
I like the way you frame that, Carly, because as an example, AI, artificial intelligence, is one of the main components in a lot of the newer technologies, especially when you're looking at monitoring of your cameras and all your environments. But like you reflected, it might not be appropriate for the town or the district, because in Illinois, the utility of artificial intelligence is prohibited on campuses, just because of federal laws and regulations.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that, Chief, regarding prohibiting artificial intelligence, especially in higher education. Glenn, you had a thought on that.
Yeah, I was just going to jump into there, and I really like how you both approach that. And it's really, I like to talk about having a roadmap going forward. Carly, to your point, this may be the end game of how we want to have this security solution for that, but there absolutely are interim steps. I love to give districts, superintendents, okay, here's what you can do immediately to address, to at least to mitigate this level of risk here. Here's perhaps a midterm, and here's a full-term solution for that. But a lot of times the assessments do, to both of your points, do start out with kind of focused on, well, we think this is going to be our technology solution out there, and we kind of aim the assessments toward that. And we need to get away from that and make the assessment, and then really to look at how can we assist and how can we help mitigate our risk based with technology, rather than focusing on the technology at the beginning.
Well, we always, say, I mean, technology is a tool, right? A tool to trade in. I see you have is that a Batman comic book behind you, Glenn? All right. Well, and we always, I always use the whole concept. Batman is just a normal person, right? He's a normal human being, but the technology gives him superpowers, right? Allows him to do things that a normal person can't do, but it starts with the human. And so based on your human resources, human assets, what technology can assist the human, like you mentioned, like the camera monitoring with, watching cameras 24/7, 365 all the time. So having technology to do that is key. So Chief, okay, how does one prioritize based on an assessment? How do you prioritize what needs to be done first? Do we need to buy more cameras with AI or no AI? Do we need to put film on the doors? Do we need to do a training program? How do you prioritize?
I'm kind of like what Glenn started out with in his assessment. I'm looking at my physical structures, both the exterior and the interior. And so wherever I hold weaknesses, for example, if there's a vestibule that enters into the school or before the school, yes, that's what I want to see. I want to put an application of 31 millimeter film on those glass panels or whatever kind of panes exist, so that it'll give an extra amount of time if a breach to the facility occurs. But I like how Glenn framed his spectrum going down, and that's generally what I do. I kind of look at the environment and the plans. Like I said, our district is new, so I'm in the throes of updating our emergency operation plan. And one of the things that is critical, not only in my district but several districts around me, is the reunification. That's a big thing, and that's where technology, in terms of vulnerabilities, will come in and be a very, very good asset, because it allows you to get those students and those youth reunited with their parents, without major incidences.
Absolutely. Carly, what about in your district? So, I mean, how do you prioritize?
So I don't think there's one overarching theme that I use to prioritize my assessments, because it's all applicable to the level of risk of the vulnerability identified to this specific district. Val, you brought up the secured vestibule. Now, if I'm walking around a building and I notice that there are needs for additional cameras along the building's exterior, but I may also make a consideration for the school to maybe build a secure vestibule to have initially. Now, depending on the needs and experiences of that district, the level of activity outdoors during the school day and at night, the amount of traffic they have during those activities, and other factors are really going to, those specific factors are going to come into play. So I would like to say that there's more, I guess, so just level of risk applicable to the district.
I can't remember who mentioned this about, school administrators being overwhelmed because school safety is such a complicated, multifaceted approach. And, the folks that participated know that we use the metaphor of, like, being given a box of puzzle pieces, right? All these pieces of the puzzle, but you don't have a box top. Like, what does it actually look like? And how are you expected to put together a puzzle if you don't know what the puzzle looks like when it's assembled? And that's what we've seen with especially with K-12, with school administration, especially schools, districts that don't have a safety director or someone who's actually in charge of ownership of school safety programs. When you give a superintendent or a principal or a school board, say, here you go, guys, here are all these pieces, now make it happen. You've got technology, you've got training, you've got cultural factors, all these other, window film, all these things that are in that box. So, Glenn, so you taking a step back, what you mentioned the different components of a solid assessment. Do you mind just reiterating those? I forgot to write it down here on my little pad. So.
No problem. And also I have to point out, I'm actually wearing my Batman tie as well. So good eye for catching the comic book in the background. But yes, there's 6 different elements is what I like to have considered in an assessment. And then from the superintendent standpoint too, you don't have to be an expert in all these specific areas and all the technologies that are out there. But really what we're looking for is that leadership putting together, as I mentioned before, the term, a roadmap. Where do we want to go? What do we want to look at improving, and enroll in people that can be experts in those different areas. But the 6 different elements, you start out with looking at your physical facilities. And then you also look at the environment. Now, when in subordinate to the environment, I'm thinking about the exterior environment, just like Carly talked to. What's the level of activity around? What's the level of activity during evening activities at the school and things like that? That can be very impactful. But also the interior environment. What's the climate? What's the safety and security related climate? And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more, I think, in our panel today. But so the environment is the second one. Then we need to look at plans and processes. The chief mentioned about a vestibule area. So we look at that from a physical security standpoint. Okay, well, what's the plan? What's the process for a parent, perhaps a non-custodial parent or a parent that has partial custody of a student? What's the process for them to come in and pick up a child? Does that jive with what you have for the physical security? Do you just let them go into campus somewhere, or do you put them into that secured vestibule? Do you have somebody that's able to monitor that person in there? Then we talk about training. What kind of training do you have for staff, students, faculty? What kind of training do you offer for your parents, for your community in general? And then how do you partner with other community entities out there to work? And I'm not just talking about public safety entities, but that's certainly a key part of that. What community partnerships do you bring in? Do you have a school resource officer? Does that school resource officer belong to the National Association of School Resource Officers, if I can even say that, as the chief mentioned? And then finally, once you get those 5 different elements, then you need to integrate that technology together with those plans and processes to identify gaps and make sure to fill them. So that's my 6.
Awesome, Chief. I think you have a thought on that.
I absolutely love that philosophy. I did not have as a robust outline as Glenn had. Me coming in, I just was looking at what kind of physical things existed, plans and processes, and then what the community offers. In my community, I have a heavy poverty problem because I'm in an urban environment. That's why I like what Carly said. Different districts are different. If I were in a more affluent district, I probably wouldn't have as many issues existing in my schools as I do in my school. And it's not that the students are bad, it's the environment, and what you'll find usually are things that come from outside in the street and then into your school community. And that's why I think community is important. That's why I really like what Glenn set out. So
Chief, kind of broadening your point as well. I think one of the most overlooked factors in the conduction of these vulnerability assessments is, what is the student's perspective of their physical safety in the building? Are there initiatives that they would be willing to develop to influence the overall climate and culture of the building, or are there gaps that they've noticed from their perspective, and the same as lower level faculty, instructional assistants, and custodians? Like, if they had the opportunity to improve some safety vulnerability measure in their building, what would it be?
What?
And that's a great segue, Carly, is to talk about climate. I think, and actually saw that in the Q&A in there was a question about, involving students in that process. And the climate discussion there's absolutely a huge impact on climate from the students, obviously, from the staff, from teachers. And it's important to understand how the school or how the district really regards safety and security as part of their climate. Is it something that's inherent in the climate? Is it something that's considered from the senior management level down to the student level as an afterthought? Is it something, when you do your lockdown drills, you get here we go, we got to do a lockdown drill again? Or is this part of the culture of that? So there's absolutely ways to integrate that in there. There's a whole varieties of curriculum, and that's actually one of the resources that's posted out there for everybody attending this. There's a variety of curriculum resources that can integrate emergency preparedness, emergency understanding, at really starting with kindergarten on up, and having that. Having student leadership, student council, being part of the school site committees and things like that can provide some insights, that we as adults may not necessarily catch. Teachers may understand it from their standpoint. And I'll say I have to give props to my wife. My wife's been a school teacher for 23 years. She's a high school math and science teacher right now. So I see a lot of these things from her perspective as well. But that climate is a huge thing. So Carly and Chief, I'd be very interested to see what your thoughts are on the school climate and how much of an impact that has.
I think it has a huge impact. And sorry, Chief, I think we unmuted at the same time. I apologize. And this will probably be a good segue for you, but the alternate perspective is really important, because our students in our community are going to be directly impacted by the initiatives that the school administrators are implementing. If you decide that if an administrator were to decide that they wanted weapons detection, like some type of metal detector at the entrance, not only do you have to plan for the procedures of how the daily routines of your entire building is going to change, but also how am I communicating that message to my district families, my students, and my staff to still ensure that they feel safe, even with this intervention measure put in place.
Chief.
Well, now that I don't feel like I'm on Family Feud, Carly, I'm agreeing with you 100%.
Hit that buzzer. That's right. Hit the buzzer. Again, I'm going back to Glenn's spectrum. Training is probably one of the key critical points, I think, in everything about changing climate and culture in the school environment. I like what he had pointed out, the student workers and, ambassadors, whatever districts call them, going on to different campuses, but they still have to be trained. It's not a matter of just getting elected or appointed to a board or a position, student council or ambassadorship. You actually have to provide them training, because they have to provide that leadership role.
And that's with any type of vocation. You always have to have kind of like a guide, not that you have to prescribe to everything within that educational format, but just a direction, and then you build it as your own. So that's what's going to change the culture.
Yeah,
One
Carly,
of the
please.
things that I'd like to bring up too, sorry, Ara, I'm just trying to buzzer beat everybody here today. One of the things that I really like to highlight in the assessments that I conduct is not only like where would someone may want to place an additional camera, but what negative space do they have that can be used for positive messaging to help enhance that school climate.
That's great. What's interesting, and Glenn mentioned something earlier about, superintendents don't have to be experts, right? And what really we really discovered the last year of conversations and meeting with superintendents and administrators is that the importance of understanding the big picture, right? Understanding the role of culture, understanding the role of training and physical security, understanding the role of technology, but just having the clear view of that box top, right? Here's what it looks like, but having key people that have the expertise to implement that, right? To take that big picture. You make policies, including vulnerability assessments and technology and everything else. Funding. We're going to talk about funding next month. But in order to get funding, you need to have an assessment done to understand where are your gaps, what do you need to fill. So this is a precursor before you get funding. But it's important for school administration to understand the big picture. That's all. We're not expecting superintendents and school board members to be school safety experts. Hire that expertise internally. Carly, I want to jump back to you about, and somebody asked this somewhere on here. Maybe it was Jose. Hey, Jose. What are some of the challenges that schools face in identifying vulnerabilities? What are the things that you've experienced as far as challenges, obstacles?
I'd like to say funding,
Yeah.
absolutely. But going a little bit even to going to the part of when they're receiving the assessment, it can be very overwhelming. So they've taken all this time to have the assessment conducted, and now how can I look at this assessment without becoming overwhelmed and deciding to keep it closed because I don't even know where to start. And then you have to address the funding question of what do I actually need? What do I actually want?
And it's funny, Carly. I mean, so that what you just described, I experienced that a few months ago with school district and a superintendent and deputy superintendent without safety security background. Just they did an assessment, and that there was a checklist of like 50 items that they came back with, and just completely overwhelmed. Like where do we start? We just don't know how to prioritize. And that's why having that expertise and understanding of a holistic approach to school safety, from physical security, training, culture, reunification, chief, all those aspects, understanding the big picture, but also knowing how to implement that is critical. Glenn.
It absolutely to the point of I believe his last month's panel talked about why superintendents, why districts should have a school safety director or safety manager, somebody in that position, because that takes that off of the superintendent's plate, gives them the ability to provide the leadership where you have that expertise in another position within that. So I think one of the things that I like to do, and it might say, for example, my comprehensive security assessments, it's a matrix of 500 elements that's actually evaluated. And as part of those assessments, and if you're actually reaching out to different consultants or contractors for assessments, one of the things I would absolutely recommend is ask them to prioritize their recommendations for improvement afterwards, because that's a key part of it. If you do an assessment without doing any level of prioritization, you're not doing a complete assessment, and that's a huge benefit to you, and that then gives you a way to start putting that roadmap together. But prioritizing those things, and a lot of times we see a problem, we like to solve a problem, right? So we'll see something and then we get invested. We put some money, we bought some technology, and then oftentimes we find ourselves in that, well, we've really invested so much where we're actually hoping this to be a solution for the next 10 years, but it's not solving the issue, and it's a band-aid at best, perhaps, or the issue is completely changed. We need to be able to kind of look forward, and that's the benefit of putting together that roadmap, so we don't get locked into a technology or a protocol that's not solving the problem we're trying to solve in the first place, just because we misidentified the problem.
And that goes back to determining what you actually need and determining what you are looking to get out of having an assessment conducted. Obviously, you're going to get physical security recommendations, possible product recommendations, but what's next? What am I going to do next? How do I implement this? What are my longer term problems that could develop as a result of this? If there's any technology available that eliminates all future problems and doesn't bring up new ones or doesn't evolve as the other technology changes, if there's a one-size-fits-all solution, please let me know.
Yeah. You said something that was very interesting. Glenn, did you say 500-point checklist? I got overwhelmed there for a second when you mentioned that. That's pretty thorough.
It's easy to get overwhelmed with the numbers, and that's divided into 12 different elements. But it's absolutely, and as I kind of look through the Q&A in here as well, it absolutely involves different things. As somebody made a great point in there about what do you look at external to the school? So buses. Everybody forgets about looking at the buses and evaluating that whole emergency communications protocol and stuff like that. And sadly, until there's some sort of incident, whether it's a simple traffic crash, which is not simple when you're talking a school bus, right? So it's all those different things we look at. You have to look at special events at schools. If you're looking at a school that has athletic events, you look at, football games, basketball games, you look at all those after hours type of things. So that you've got to be able to cover all that into this assessment. So that's why you get those huge kind of numbers that are staggering at first to think about.
Chief.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with what Carly said, one size fits all. That includes the directors that was on the last meeting and what Glenn mentioned. I don't want to dismiss police, but because police they're kind of built for crises. They go into law enforcement and they deal with crisis situations all the time. And what I've learned in the school district, there's always a crisis. I don't think that I had one day, where something didn't go on. But it's just not police. Like Carly comes out of the correctional vocation. I have friends in the leadership roles for safety and security who are firefighters. And I think that if you just have the acumen to address crisis situations, that's what's going to, be a good fit for a school district.
No, absolutely. Carly made a point earlier that I just wanted to circle back to. It's the whole notion, with schools that you don't know what you don't know. And then when you find out what you didn't know, now you're accountable for that, right? So you have all these things. Oh boy, I didn't realize we have these vulnerabilities. I lost a family member years ago because, never went to the doctor, because it just didn't want to know that headache or whatever that is. I just don't want to deal with it. So I won't do that. And it's just one of the same thing. It's like, you have the ignorance. Well, I don't want to know what the vulnerabilities are because if I do, then want to deal with it. But we keep going back to that whole notion. Well, then hire a safety director. I have someone who can take those, identify that can understand those vulnerabilities and implement that. Stacey, you had a great question. I think I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into that about looking locations outside the school. And Chief, in Decatur, so are you looking at, you mentioned more of an urban campus. Are you looking at sites outside the school, like bus stops and other locations when considering vulnerability assessments?
Absolutely. Our elementary schools are the actual physical structures that will have the transportation component. the high school environment, they will be paired with the city's transportation network. So they'll get on regular bus routes. So the concern, like with college campuses and university, is what happens outside. and so I can protect kids when they're inside my buildings, the best of my abilities. But then when they go outside and they're, on that corner, or and they're in that depot waiting on their bus transportation home or athletic event or whatever, I have to rely on my partners, the police department. That's and make sure that they're patrolling. So that goes back to what Glenn was talking about with training, dealing with partners. We need to work with our law enforcement, fire department, everybody, to make sure that our kids can be safe as part of a vulnerability assessment.
What?
One,
Oh,
Okay,
Sorry.
sorry. Just to hop onto that, I think this takes us back to culture again, right? So one of the things we look at when we look at active shooter training, a kindergarten teacher, for example, is one of the last people in the world that really wants to have active shooter training, because they don't want to recognize that what they may do can affect those in their charge, and that's a very tough thing. So a lot of this is about empowerment. We're trying to develop that culture of safety and security, that level of personal responsibility. Hey, security is everybody's responsibility, so we all contribute to that. But trying to do those trainings, those awareness trainings for bus drivers, to the chief's point, training bus drivers on here's things to look for. Okay, what's the emergency communication protocols? How do we support our transportation specialists out there from the district? Do they, they have a radio dispatch? Hopefully they have cameras in the buses and things like that. Do they have the ability to launch an immediate type of alert or some sort of warning sign for that? Because that could very well affect much beyond that particular bus. It could be something much beyond that. So trying to develop that culture of safety and security and trying to empower people with the training really brings them together. And then the one final point, and then I'll shut up for a minute, is that the chief had mentioned NASRO before. One of the biggest things I see is partnering with law enforcement and bringing them into the fold. A lot of district schools will have a school resource officer. Maybe they're just kind of off in their own office. Maybe they've got a big caseload. They've got more work than they can possibly do. But trying to bring them in, trying to embrace them into the community. One of the trends I've seen lately that I really love is the school resource officer vehicle having the school's logo, having the school's mascot put on there, trying to really bring that person into the fold, making them feel welcome, making them interact at a much broader, much deeper level. I think that's very impactful.
Absolutely. And to go off your point, Glenn, one of the tenets of NASRO, I believe, is also a law enforcement or public safety educator. So they can bring a lot to the table as far as implementation or maybe even development of a public safety curriculum for the elementary school age kids who may be having their first experience seeing a police officer, let alone in their school. Which is not a normal or a usual circumstance for all of our kiddos. And developing that relationship will also help teachers possibly be more comfortable with a police presence in their school. Because when they signed up to teach, that's exactly what they signed up for, not to essentially take down an active asylum. And I think that's really important that administrators remember that.
And I'm gonna agree with you there, Carly. The NASRO is a great first step. My district or in our district, we've just adopted that. Not only for the SROs, we encourage them to go to both the basic and advanced schools, but also the security staff, where we are because they have a training mechanism just for school security and what that represents. But the teachers, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because they are actually critical to how we navigate safety. even into a restorative justice type practice. And you coming from corrections, you know where that's kind of very beneficial. You know, people have to be held accountable, and that's a vulnerability, because if they don't, anything that they bring from the outside into the school, that is what makes our kids unsafe, or the feeling of being unsafe.
Glenn.
I'll say one of the biggest things I see is a lot of times we'll send the school resource officer to a security related conference, or we'll send the security director. Well, I think it's hugely impactful to not only send those people, but if you can, send perhaps some the different teachers that are in teacher leadership positions across the different schools. You may even send the teacher it's very skeptical about why do we even do some of those things, because that's a huge opportunity to educate them, gives them more buy-in, more influence on that, and then that pays huge dividends across the district, I think.
We have about 15 minutes, and so I really love to tie in what what happens with the assessment. But before I do, just one thing that really that struck me that might be overlooked, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but one vulnerability assessment that ties to technology, since I'm a technology guy, is a lack of interoperability, right? So if you have 3 different systems, you have an emergency notification system that does not communicate with your access control system, which does not communicate with your two-way radio system, etc. That to me would seem to be a significant vulnerability that may be overlooked. And Jose Figueroa mentioned something about about the technology and that interoperability. But is that something that is commonly looked at? Is that in the 500 points of the assessment, Glenn?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's from public safety. I'll say and think about this. Law enforcement, fire, emergency, medical. It goes from access to those. Fire department. You're talking about Knox boxes for the most part for routine access, but it absolutely talks about the ability to communicate for public safety across the campus. We have a lot of brick and mortar, a lot of challenges getting radio systems out there. Does the school district, if they have a school resource officer, or even if they don't, what do they communicate within it? Does law enforcement dispatch have access to that if they need to? Where do radios work? Where don't they work? Same thing with cell phones. I mean, we have a district, we're kind of here up in the mountains, so we have a district that a lot of times you don't even have Wi-Fi, you don't have cell phone signal and stuff like that. And then when there's a bear on campus, which is a fairly frequent thing around here, when there's a bear on campus and you have lockdown for bear, how do you communicate that? And absolutely having those things, recognizing those challenges to interoperability and communications in advance is what's key, right? You don't want to figure that out in the middle of an issue when you're down on the football field and you realize you can't get out because the football field's in a stadium. Those type of things, and that gives you, having law enforcement, having public safety on campus throughout the year for different training events, different things like that. That gives you the ability to evaluate that as they do that more.
And I think, in addition to interoperability, I think it's important to also be cognizant of, am I approaching technologies that duplicate what they do? Am I going to look at one that has these parameters, this future capability, if I decide I'm interested in this? Or am I going to go with product B, where it has potential to operate school-wide with my systems that are already in place? Or am I just duplicating what I already have?
Yes, and I spoke to a campus police chief I think last summer, probably Iaclea, about new technologies. Like, well, we can't do anything because if we buy something new, we have to replace everything else that we have, and that's why it's critical from a zero now perspective. Our technology partners, like, that is critical. Interoperability is a key thing. One quote that I want to share with everyone. So I mentioned Joe Samaha, our co-founder of Zero Now. Now, he always talks about the 3 elements of school safety. There's from security, you have the hardware, you have the software, and then you have the hardware, right? The people side of things, and that's such an important factor. So before we jump to, because we have a bunch of questions from people that registered beforehand and live questions here, but before we do, just want to get your perspective. So what do you do with this assessment? We kind of talked about a little bit about prioritization, but here we go. Do you just put it on the shelf and say, yep, we did it? We check that off the list. We'll go to the school board and say, yeah, we did our assessment. What's the next step? Glenn, we'll start with you.
Sure, absolutely. And one of the things too, and it was very clear to me as you were going through talking through that. One of the things that we look at assessments oftentimes is it's a snapshot in time. But what we have to recognize is that assessment, the security protocols and things like that, it's continuously changing. We like to be one and done. We did our assessment, we're good for the next 10 years. We're going to go buy some technology, we're going to do some training, we're going to do some stuff like, yeah, unfortunately, we can't look at it like that because it is completely a dynamic, continuously changing thing that we need to evaluate and reevaluate as we implement different solutions and things like that. So that's where this whole idea of a roadmap, this is where we have, here's our priority risks we've identified. Here's how we're going to address those. And as that starts to progress, okay, are we actually indeed solving or mitigating that particular risk in the first place? And if we're not, we want to figure that out, a little bit down the road, not 3 years down the road, to say, well, this was great. We spent a lot of money, but we didn't really solve what we thought we were solving in the first place. So you have to have that ability to look at what's changing. And then certainly there's a lot of things as you're integrating technology solutions in there. You've got to change your plans and policies. You've got to change training. So if we've got this new communication system, everybody needs to understand how to use that. And I think a lot of that can be done. We like to think about these big, huge training exercises where we bring law enforcement in and we do this big, huge, massive 4-hour training kind of thing. But I think the day-to-day type of thing, how do we integrate that into our day-to-day process is huge. One of the school districts I work with, and one of the things they came up with is they take a 5 minute, just 5 minutes at a weekly staff meeting. Okay, this happened. We had a child that was stung on the playground and then going into anaphylactic shock, and we talk about that for 5 minutes. At that very basic level, we go through and talk through those things, but that kind of gives you that pathway going forward to what we need to change. And the assessment, again, gives you that baseline, and you've got to move and you prioritize initially, then you reevaluate that. So that's kind of it's a continuously looping process, and that's a lot of times we get away from that loop to evaluate our solution.
Yes, exactly, Glenn. And that is, this concept we've been talking about, operationalizing school safety. Not just a one-off, not just your emergency plan on your bookshelf, but day-to-day operationalizing school safety. And it requires dedicated leadership to do that. It requires everybody, students, guidance counselors, principals. I mean, everybody. It is a community effort. So that you're absolutely right on with that, spot on. We're going to take some questions here. We have a lot. So Chief Dussault, hey Dan. He wants to know if anyone could discuss your experience on how you assess playgrounds. We talked about offsite bus stops, stuff like that. What about playgrounds? I think Carly might have some thoughts. Or Chief, we'll start with you.
Yeah, the districts usually have a lot of property, and we particularly have a property that has an open area, playground area. So it's a park and a school, so it's not enclosed. The fields are enclosed, and so what we do is we have human assets that are out there that do the patrol for before care and after care. So we have extended time that we have kids, and part of the perimeter check with the staff is to go out there and clear the park, plus signage that's out there that says, hey, while the school's in session, park can't be used except after 5:30 when extended day closes, and then of course on the weekends when there's no activities. Just like with any type of car park feature that you'll go into, they'll have times that you can use it, and then if it's reserved, you can't use it during that time.
Thanks, Chief. Carly?
So playgrounds can be a complex place for the community and the school. Just like Chief was saying, there are a lot of schools, especially where I'm at here in Montgomery County, that their playground also is duplicated as the community park. So now how are we balancing the human access with fencing to keep our kiddos in and the community out while still maintaining that welcoming atmosphere, and not like our school as a prison.
Absolutely. Glenn, I think you had a thought on that as well.
I was gonna say, absolutely. It's, the playgrounds are about keeping the little ones in and the big ones out, right? But it's so much more beyond that. It's education of the people, the teachers or the monitors that are out there on suspicious levels of activity. To the chief's point, getting out there, clearing the area. You want to make sure, if many areas have a robust homeless population, you want to make sure that you've got some level of assessment that there's no sharps or anything like that are left behind that can harm the children there. But we also look at things like vehicle intrusion. What's the ability to come off the road? What sort of physical blocking is there just to prevent a vehicle on purpose or by accident of intruding into the playground areas? And then you look at security technology of adding different layers where you look at monitoring and areas that can use artificial intelligence. You look at to see, maybe there's the ability to monitor this around the time of using the playground and not using the playground. So there's a whole lot of elements to it. Dan, it's a very complex, just as Carly said, it's a very complex thing to address, but you've got to kind of look at all those different elements at the very least to start with.
We have a number of folks mention past K-12 as guidelines, which is an excellent resource, and it talks about a multi-layered approach, which is a great tool for conducting assessments. So thanks for the folks who are posting about that. So Beth Sanborn, so we did touch upon this, but Beth asked if you see any value in students in the safety discussion for assessments. So let me kind of rephrase that a little bit, because we talked a little bit, Carly mentioned about students being involved, but who should be involved in the whole assessment process? Carly, we'll start with you.
So I think so you can't interview everybody about the building and get kind of like their firsthand knowledge, because then the assessment would never get done. But I think it's definitely important to include teachers of kiddos with access functional needs, teachers, anyone assigned to recess duty or that provides an additional threshold of supervision throughout the school day, and students as per administration's discretion, but that's where also the superintendent and district administrators can feel empowered to do their own internal climate assessment and maybe even an informal safety perception map of the building based off of student feedback.
Awesome. Thanks, Carly. Chief, thoughts on that?
Yes, I'm going to totally agree with everything that Carly said. The addition is that you have to have your community involved. You have parents that have children that may have autism or some type of disability. You have teachers that understand what these disabilities are. And one of the most critical vulnerabilities that I found in school systems is that you have a collection of buildings. Some may be brand new. Like in our district, we have one that's almost complete, brand new, state of the art. And then we have one that's 150 years old. And so trying to get kids in and out, especially those kids that have some disability, is difficult. I won't be able to get anything accomplished unless part of that assessment is inclusive of those parents and those teachers who are aware of those kids, their sets of circumstances, and how I can, get my staff to get them to safety.
I'm going to respond quickly to Maria Harder. So Maria asked if there are any assessment tools for higher education similar to PASS, and there is. I'm glad that you asked, Maria. There's an amazing assessment tool called the 32 NCSI, and 32 in memory of the 32 victims of the Virginia Tech massacre, and the families of Virginia Tech pulled together some incredible experts to create a very comprehensive, maybe 500 points like Glenn's assessment, but it does provide a very comprehensive self-assessment of a campus's vulnerabilities. So I'm glad that you asked that, Maria. But here's the bad news. We're out of time. But before I ask our guests to provide their final thoughts and words of wisdom before we depart, we had way more questions than we can handle here live, but we can continue this conversation in the Zero Now community. We'll have, if you go to zeronow.org, click on community, we'll paste the questions that came in online as well as beforehand during the registrations, so we can continue that, and Glenn and Carly and Chief Tally will be able to respond to those. But so just wanted to remind you that Glenn, any final thoughts for our participants on vulnerability assessments?
Well, it's tough to talk about this in an hour, right? You know, we could go off and all three of us could, all four of us could spend the entire day talking about that. But it's you got to take small bites. It's a very large undertaking, but you've got to be able to break that down into manageable segments, so it is not so overwhelming, because we need to get off and get out and do these type of assessments and things like that. And just very quick, because I saw it in the comments and questions, Brett had said something about behavioral threat assessment. That's absolutely part of everything. And the ability to report suspicious activity, that's going to be, I would suggest, probably a whole nother one of these panel discussions, but that's absolutely part of everything. But I thank everybody for the opportunity. Thank you for all the great questions and the engagement, everybody.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Glenn. So we are going to be diving deep into behavioral threat assessments, see something, say something programs as part of our prevention. This is part of that path to safer schools, right? So before we get there, we've got a safety team, we're understanding our vulnerabilities, we're going to seek fundings to implement these programs, and then moving on to prevention programs. Carly, final thoughts, words of wisdom for our participants.
Words of wisdom. So school safety is really everybody's responsibility. And Glenn, thank you for bringing up the behavioral threat assessment. And as you said, you'll be doing more segments on that. But we shouldn't have to rely on physical safety to provide us a safe culture and climate for our schools. But it's definitely one of the most important factors as well.
Thank you, Carly. Appreciate it. Chief, final thoughts.
My final thought is in Glenn's spectrum. He mentioned community. That I can't emphasize that enough. I would encourage any director out there or police chief, because I know some people don't have security, they just have SROs in schools. Use National Night Out as a pivotal time to reach your community and find out what they want. You can do your surveys to see what they think about safety, and then you can address your vulnerabilities that way.
Thanks, Chief. Very wise words as well. And just want to thank all three of you, and thank our participants for joining us today. And we are on this journey to safer schools together. That's part of this. So sharing our experiences, best practices with one another is the only way we're going to get there. A couple of things I want to share with you before we wrap things up here. Our next program is funding. Go figure. The next start of this part of the process, funding our safety program, May 21st. You register for that online. Zero Now is going to have a number of pretty big announcements later this month. We talk about school safety directors and the importance of the leadership, but also the path to safer schools. So keep an eye out for all of that. Just want to thank you again, Glenn, Carly, Chief, for joining us today. Keep an eye out. This replay will be available by next week. We'll see you back in the community to continue this discussion in the section for the program. So thanks, everyone. Take care.